Welcome to Compassionate Cultures, the podcast. You're about to go on a journey of empathy, understanding, and transformation. Get ready to dive into the heart of humanity's most pressing questions with me, Rebecca Hemmings, the CEO of Strawberry Words Training Consultancy, and guests. It's time to turn up the volume on kindness and to amplify the voices of minorities that often go unheard. This podcast asks questions like, how can we create workplaces where ethnic minorities thrive without the chains of career stagnation? What if universities were safe havens for all, free from the storm of microaggressions? And how can we bridge the gaps between cultures that have been divided by the walls of bias and ignorance? This is not just a podcast. This is a revolution of empathy. Welcome to Compassionate Cultures, the podcast. Get ready to explore, learn, and change the world one compassionate conversation at a time. Right, so I've got a piece of research that I want to share with you. This is following the series around undoing your unconscious biases or undoing your unconscious bias. I've been looking at that word bias and biases. There's the plural of biases, is biases. Because sometimes I think the way in which we say unconscious bias, we're talking about lots of biases. Therefore, what we're really saying is biases. So I'm just saying that because it's something I've been playing with in my head. Do we say undo your unconscious biases or undo your unconscious bias? I think it should be the former, biases, but that's open to debate. And also, as I read a lot of material around this, the tendency is to use unconscious bias, meaning biases. Anyway, I've been reading Follow the Science, Proven Strategies for Reducing Unconscious Bias by David Hoffman and Helen Winter. They're both professors from Harvard Law School. So they've written this paper in the fall or the autumn of 2022. And so I think they've got some really great strategies in there. And I'm just taking a few to do this episode with, but I think I might use this for future episodes because I think it's ever so valuable. And I think the first thing, the place I want to start with is if you've heard no other episodes about undoing your unconscious biases, I think this is the perfect episode for you to listen to because I'm going to take it from the beginning, really, in a way, and then talk about specific tried, tested, research methods to reduce unconscious biases, right? Now, the first way in which you want to undo your unconscious bias I'm going to keep messing up with this, forgive me, is by developing an awareness of your unconscious bias, right? And they say also in this document, they talk about, you can't possibly or begin to reduce your biases until you develop an awareness. So how can you do that? Well, one of the ways in which you can do that is by taking the implicit association test. Okay, that's Harvard University's implicit association test, or IAT. You can Google it, it's free of charge. And, there's lots of different areas in which you can measure different types of unconscious biases. I've done it. It's a bit scary because they're unconscious, you're not thinking you hold these biases. And so it can be really eye-opening. Okay. So go and do that. But what they say in this document, which I totally support, is that, one of the resistance to learning about unconscious biases is that many people just will not accept that they have unconscious biases. And we find this all the time when delivering training. No matter how much you say, it's been researched, this is factual. It's, I'm not just saying this, I'm not talking out to the side of my face. People will still not believe they have unconscious biases. And sometimes people can get really annoyed when you make that insinuation or when you state that fact. It's almost, and they use a term here, it's, for a lot of people, it's like a moral crime to believe you have unconscious biases. It's not, it's human. We all have them. And the sooner we realize we all have them, the more we can do to reduce those biases. And so it doesn't even make sense, you know, if people are scared, and I understand why they're scared, because it's not nice to learn that what you really think about this group of people is quite discriminatory or prejudiced, or you're stereotyping those people. It's not nice, especially if you don't think you think those things. However, when you're aware that you do those things, then you can do something about it. But if you have denied the fact that you have unconscious biases, then you'll still be subjecting people to this discriminatory attitudes or behavior. So, you know, think logically. It actually doesn't make sense to hold steadfast and just, you know, hold on to this belief that I don't have unconscious biases. Doesn't make sense. But, you know, we're human, and sometimes we can become irrational when we're really scared. Okay, and I understand that, I get that, but we want to move forward, right? Okay, talking about moving forward, let me move forward with this. So I'm just going to read a part of this out in terms of what they say really works. This is David Hoffman and Helen Winter. I actually thought this was really interesting, actually, that they put David Hoffman's name in front of Helen Winter, because that demonstrates a male firstness bias. You know, often when we say like boys and girls, males and females, Mr. and Mrs., we generally tend to put the man first. What is that? Is that not a bias? Interesting. Anyway, so what they've said here, a study of gender bias conducted by researchers at the University of Wisconsin involved 2,290 faculty members in 92 departments in medical, science and engineering divisions of the university. The results, which are also discussed in part 3 below, show that an intervention designed to increase awareness of gender bias, which was a 2.5-hour workshop, in which both the existence of gender bias and its effects were studied. What this resulted in were changed attitudes and behaviour amongst the faculty regarding gender equity. These changes included increased motivation to counteract gender bias and greater self-efficacy to promote change. Woohoo! Isn't that amazing? Okay, so, you know, and I'll go on to what factors need to be in place in order to ensure durability of this type of training. But it just basically shows that by participating in just a 2.5-hour workshop, behavior was changed, which whenever you're teaching, whenever you're educating people, that's really what you want to do, is to change the concepts or change behavior or cause people to think. This has caused people to do all 3 of those, okay? They've changed their attitudes, they've changed what they're doing, they have greater belief in themselves to promote positive change, okay? And what they said was these effects were found not only 3 days after the workshop, but also 3 months after the workshop, okay? However, what they did find is unconscious gender bias as measured by the IAT, the implicit association test that I mentioned, using a test that examined the association of male-female with the categories of leader, supporter. So basically, you know, it's how what they're talking about here is, you know, who do you associate a leader to be? Is it male or female? Who do you think a supporter should be? Is it male? Is it female? They said that was largely unchanged. So even though they've done this 2.5-hour workshop and they're promoting gender equality or equity, and they've got changed attitudes, their association to who are the leaders and who are the supporters in society or in this particular context, they were largely unchanged. This suggests that the durability of the bias that associates male with leader and female with supporter, basically it's entrenched, which I thought was very, very interesting. So I wonder what the work, I guess that part, the work to do there would be to make that, you know, explicit, to have a conversation about that, to do the work around that, just as they did around general unconscious gender bias. So fascinating stuff. So what they're saying works with regards to unconscious bias training. Hey, I know you're enjoying the podcast episode, but I just want to quickly come in and say, look, if you're an organization that needs anti-racism training for your organization because your staff are lacking in a racial literacy, they don't have the words, they get stuck when talking about racism, they want to be able to deal with incidents, but they're not sure how to, then check out our Time to Talk About Race online CPD accredited course at strawberrywords.co.uk. Okay, we can train from 10 to 10,000. But get in touch today at admin@strawberrywords.co.uk. Now back to the episode. Is that, they spoke here about two different types and I've only gone through one. They spoke about a semester long course, a term long course, and also a 2.5 hour workshop. What they said that they were more robust than these two workshops were more robust than simply a brief statement bringing the awareness of bias to the attention of studies participants. A contrary example, a study of juror behaviour after the jurors were given a single paragraph instruction about the existence of bias and the admonition to avoid letting bias affect jurors' decisions, showed no change in the jurors' decision making. Come on now. So I'm getting excited about this because I think sometimes the tendency can be, the intention can be very good, but the tendency can be is to kind of sweep over this stuff. Look, if you just say it, if you just put it in a paragraph, if you just put a line on our website, if you just create a little pamphlet about this, it's going to stop unconscious bias. It's going to do something about it. No, this has come from, one of the greatest universities, arguably in the world. They're saying, look, we've done the work and we've done the research. And if you just put a line in a document, it's not going to make a difference. OK, so what did make a difference was what were those workshops? So the 2.5 hour workshop and a semester long course. OK, all right. I'm getting too excited. I need to just finish this. So I'm going to get to the point because they didn't want this episode to be longer than 10 minutes and we're already at 10 minutes. So it says here, an additional study examined whether the impact of raising awareness about gender bias and the effects of bias might be affected by the format in which the information was presented. This research was done at Yale University, where 30 male undergraduates were shown data about 10 pairs of male and female employees, including their salary levels, working in 10 different departments of a fictitious company to see whether the study's subjects noticed a pattern of salary discrimination against the women. When the participants in the study were given a fact sheet that aggregated the data for the company as a whole, they were far more likely to conclude there was a pattern of discrimination. Right, so basically, when there was no identifying information. When you couldn't see whether this was a man or this was a woman, or whatever, they could clearly see there's discrimination. However, where am I? As compared with participants who saw 10 information sheets, one for each employee, the conclusion of the researchers was that raising awareness of the bias requires sensitivity to cognitive distortions, including being aware of one's resistance to seeing bias. And I love this. Just listen to this. It says, the desire to deny injustice blinds many justice-loving individuals to the existence of discrimination. I just need to repeat that again. I need to repeat it. Okay. So the conclusion of the researchers was that raising awareness of the bias requires sensitivity to cognitive distortions. Okay, including being aware of one's resistance to seeing bias. The desire to deny injustice blinds many justice-loving individuals to the existence of discrimination. So again, it comes back to whenever delivering unconscious bias training, we have to talk about the fact that this is a tendency of many people. It's so uncomfortable to possibly entertain the idea that you might have unconscious biases, or which they did say earlier in this report, that you just might be aware of your unconscious biases and you're just trying to hide them. We have to be real about that as well. Okay, so such is that tendency to either want to hide your unconscious biases or just to not believe you have unconscious biases that many justice-loving individuals deny the existence of discrimination. Oh, okay, I need to get to the point now, and I'm going to get to the end. Okay, so I'm just going to say this. So in terms of what works, what is known and researched to work in ensuring that people reduce their unconscious bias. And notice I keep saying reduce and not eliminate. I think, based on everything that I've read and come across, I think it's very, very extremely difficult to completely eliminate your unconscious biases. They've solidified, they've formed over many times, but what you can do is reduce them. And this is what they keep saying here. You can reduce them. So be realistic about your expectations, okay? So what they say here is what makes unconscious bias interventions, workshops, training effective. In fact, let me just say this. Based on studies described above, one might reasonably conclude that interventions designed to raise awareness of bias and the effects of bias need to be, number one, robust, meaning the information presented needs to be unambiguous. So state it very clearly. Two, participatory. Unlike the one-way communication exemplified by jury instructions. Hello, just makes sense, right? When we have our online training course, it's CPD accredited. I'm just going to do unashamedly promote this, but I'm saying this because when we were making it CPD accredited, we had to prove that learning took place. So we had to have assessments, which makes sense, right? Because otherwise, what's the point? Somebody just, mindlessly going through a course. They could just put play on, on the recorder and go and make some, I don't know, fried dumplings or something in the kitchen. I don't know, but you get the point. Like, they don't have to engage with the video. Okay, they could just make it look like they've watched it. But if they have to then engage with the material and prove that they've learned something, ta-da, this is saying this contributes to a more effectiveness in terms of that training or workshop. Number three, sustained over time, since the durability of such interventions is uncertain. So that's one thing they said in this is, whilst they were able to test some of these what's the word? Experiments? I know there's a better word than that, but I'm going to say that. Like after 3 weeks or after 3 months, they've not been able to test it much longer than that. So to make sure that this information sticks, you're going to have to repeat this, which makes sense. We all forget things, right? And then number four, designed to include information about our psychological defenses to recognizing our own biases. Now, I've gone over that a million times, so I won't go over it again, but you can see the importance of that. So I hope that's as exciting to you as it is to me, because there's a way through this. We don't have to be stuck, or people within organizations do not have to be stuck being afraid of this word unconscious bias because it means you're a bad person. No, people put meaning to that in that respect. That's not what it means. That's not what it connotates, okay? But only through having conversations, meaningful conversations about unconscious bias can we begin to get to the point where those are being reduced, and ultimately people who are marginalized and minoritized and targeted, discriminated against, stereotyped, prejudiced, they can begin to experience the workplace on a more equitable and fair and just more pleasant footing. And isn't that what we all want, really? I think so. So that brings me to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.